address something that Warren said about inequalities within the workplace. I just want to draw your attention to something that's already going on in education, which is very invisible, and that's preschool education has already been effectively privatised. The vast majority of preschool provision is provided by private, voluntary and independent providers. I go around these settings as a council employee regulating their the way they work with children with special educational needs. And what I see is young women working at barely above the national minimum wage with children who are the youngest children in our country who deserve the most qualified and the most expert people. I'm mentioning this because when Tristram Hunt talked about keeping children's centres open, he talked about bringing in the voluntary sector. There is a movement within some parts of the right of the party to talk about cooperative solutions with a voluntary sector to cuts. We need to be very, very, very careful of this. I'll just tell you the story of my partner. He works in the voluntary sector, providing mental health services. I won't mention the name of the charity, but you may be able to guess. Their advocacy services went out to tender, and it was tendered. They had, in order to win, they had to put in a bid that was low. Their managers came back to the advocates and said, really great news, we've won the tender. Oh, by the way, you're taking a 15% pay cut. And that was forced upon them. They approached Unison. Unison was unable to redress that because the Tories have introduced legislation which means that an employer, if they give a business case, can unilaterally reduce your salary. So when we're talking about we could do things cooperatively with the voluntary sector, there is a role for the voluntary sector, but it's in addition to public services, and we absolutely need to fight this tooth and nail. As to your other points, yes, we should bring back clause 4. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. I'm afraid I didn't get all the points down, so I'll just try and talk around some of them. Firstly, I think I want to say how important it is, and what's been so inspiring for me today as well, is that we really do have that dividing line between what we believe in and what we campaign for and what we want in terms of an equal society, and what really the Tories and all the other parties, as far as I'm concerned, stand for. And I'm picking up the point Dawn made about the landlord scheme here and the attacks on our councillors for pushing through a scheme like that. I want to put on record that Amber Rudd is actually supporting those landlords quite openly and publicly, and that to me is right, because it shows the people of this town and everyone the difference between us and Labour and Socialists, and the you know, the support of these profit-making landlords. At a very late stage in my life, I've decided to do my first degree at the University of Kent in social anthropology, which is amazing. I was lucky, I'm doing it part-time, and I just got in on time before the fees hiked up to £9,000, and I can just about manage financially without taking out, because I don't particularly, I'm not really in a position to have a loan. I think it's absolutely appalling, the situation. I believe in lifelong learning, and I believe in a free education service and a publicly owned, and I think what happens is we go again now looking at some of the universities unfortunately making profits and some substandard accommodation for our students. I think it's wrong. I don't have an answer to it, and I do agree that I think it does sound tokenistic to say, well, look at us, we're going to reduce to 6,000. We need to go to the Labour Party, have that discussion. We need to get our ideas and look at good models whereby we can avoid students coming out with these terrible debts, following them around through their whole future. So that's my point on there. I think I just wanted to talk a bit personally as well. Through the awful years of Blair and the new Labour government, we in Hastings and Rye, I mean, I've lived here for 22 years, I'm a Londoner, well, I can only talk personally, but we as a party really struggled. And what kept me going through it all was being a councillor, actually, and being deputy leader of the council, and really believing that we made a difference to the community. This banner here that Claire mentioned was actually created by my partner for the 2003 Iraq against the Iraq War demo, and I'm sure many of us, and I'm pleased to say it was on national news, and it was a very distinctive banner. I didn't believe ever that war would happen. I remained optimistic. I marched with the 1, 2 million, ever many we were, and that was devastating to me, both personally and politically. And I think, quite frankly, if I hadn't been on the council, I may well have left the Labour Party. Our membership was decimated, and it was halved basically in those years. I think when I first got involved, we were 1,000 in Hastings and Rye. We were about 500, but we're creeping up again. And what the value of this is, we need to bring people back, the people who did get disillusioned, and say we need, as John's outlined, we need to stay on the left and make sure the Labour Party is representative of all of our views as a party that benefits all sections of the community and is a party of equality and social justice. So on the clause 4, I mentioned earlier about the motions, we campaigned long and hard to stop that from happening in Hastings and Rye. We failed, but we'll fight that fight again and get it back, because we believe in socialism, as I said, equality and social justice for all, and that's what we need to campaign on from today onwards. Okay. Thank you so much.
Quickly, because you had a long meeting, can I just mention about, it was raised about the Green Agenda, by the Deputy Leader of Council. On the Green Agenda, I was one of those ones who launched the Green New Deal at the House of Commons, and the Labour Party has virtually adopted it, which is great. And you'll hear references to it in Ed Miliband's speech. But there is a contradiction, I think we need to be clear about it. There's one thing to adopt the Green New Deal, but to then associate yourselves with the potential of fracking, further subsidies to the nuclear power industry, and the expansion of aviation undermines the commitment to the Green New Deal. And I think we have to be absolutely clear on the left. We cannot allow the extension of any more fossil fuel industries. So that means that's why we oppose fracking. It also means that we can. I don't know whether you saw over the last 6 weeks they've thrown a few more recalculations of how much they need to give to the private sector on the clean-up of nuclear power. We're literally into a legacy of tens of billions of pounds a year now, poured into private sector companies and corporations who are profiteering at the expense that we warned them about some years ago. So I think, my view, and I understand all the concerns about the nuclear industry being closed down, but eventually we have to address the issue of closing down the nuclear power industry. And if that means now working up the plan, as we've done in other industries, for alternative training, skills and employment for those workers in that sector now, let's get to it. And the issue around aviation, I would say this, wouldn't I? I represent the area that's got Heathrow in it. The third runway was threatened, Kramer promised that it wouldn't go ahead. He's reneged on that commitment. It was a NIMBYist campaign. I've been at it for 40 years there. I was at the Terminal 4, Terminal 5, and all the rest of the inquiries. It was a NIMBYist campaign until Climate Camp came. And they came down, 1,000 people occupied a field, set up tents and all the rest of it. The local people got involved. It was a bizarre occasion, all these elderly villagers of Heathrow, some of the Blue Rinse Brigade sitting on these straw bales, saying, what is in this cigarette? But it was a creative discussion of how actually that one proposal has a connection with air pollution, noise pollution, and then actually the potential loss of the planet. So actually now I'm opposed to all expansion of aviation now. I don't want it going to Gatwick or Heathrow or elsewhere. I think we've got a real issue on our hands. And unless we put pressure on the aviation industry, it'll be like the car industry where they refuse to address lead in petrol. Unless we put pressure on them, there will be no sustainable aviation developed, no sustainable energy sources, that sort of thing. So they're the three areas on the Green Agenda I think we have to address. This was like an interview that you get, that was a typical journalist, and we'll give you an NUJ card, I hope you've got one. Can't afford one. Oh, fair enough. Well, there's a student NUJ rate as well. Come and have a chat with us about that, don't worry. In terms of tuition fees, LRC policy is straightforward, isn't it? Scrap them. We can, it's free, exactly as Claire said, free education right the way through. If we could afford it, you know, right the way from the Second World War onwards, expanding education was want to be one of the civilising factors of our society. Education was meant to be a gift from one generation to another, not a commodity to be sold. That's why we're opposed to tuition fees. And part of introducing a redistribution of wealth in our country through wealth taxes, Tobin taxes, etc., is to enable that to happen. Andrew Fisher and I, we did something in Parliament a few years ago when he was working with me, and we raised in one of the budget debates the way in which actually not only could you scrap tuition fees, but you could wipe out the debt as well further regularly with a limited tax policy. In terms of the issue around trade union leaders, etc., we set up the Trade Union Coordinating Group to bring together the left leaders in the same way that Tony Benn had years ago, meetings of the left general secretaries. And we've tried to use that to ensure that people campaigning in their individual unions also campaign across unions. It includes 9 or 10 of the left trade unions. It doesn't include, for example, Unison, GMB or Unite, but we have a working relationship with elements within those unions to try and ensure that we shift them onto a campaigning basis. And if you look at some of the campaigns that Unite have undertaken, I think the development of Unite Community has been a huge breakthrough in terms of bringing people into activity. You'll see that there are people fighting on the left and raising issues through their union onto the leadership's agenda. That will become even more important now if we go into government, and that's why the coordination across these different campaigns is absolutely critical. I keep saying this, and some of you may have heard time and time again, 3 ways we change the world. One is we learn how to do it. To control our working environment, which we set up trade unions so that we have some democratic control of wages and working conditions. We then recognise we need to, if we want to control our community, we need a political voice, so we set up the Labour Party. But then also we recognised that actually the democratic process doesn't always work for us, particularly with the powers of capital. So we have a third strategy, which we used to call insurrection, but we're now polite now and call it direct action. And what the LRC has tried to do is combine all those 3 and bring them together. And that's what the left platform meeting was all about, trying to get the trade unions working more effectively with the Labour Party and others on the left, and then also bringing in the social movements that could mobilise direct action to support those policies. That's the way forward. Whether in government or not, that is the way forward. More importantly, whether in government, to get our issues on the agenda and also to ensure that a Labour government is accountable to us and democratically accountable in that way. With regard to that's why the left platform was brought about, that's the question. In terms of the Green Party, let's be clear, I work with the Greens on a number of issues. Derek Wall in particular is a socialist Green, and within that section all the rest of it. But the reality is, they are not a socialist party, and they're a wide, disparate group. And as you've seen in Brighton, some of them are quite reactionary in the administration of services when they get their hands on them. So it will be one of those situations, as it is now, if we go into power in some form, if they want to support us on individual issues like Trident, or renationalisation of some services and all the rest, great, but at the end of the day, they're not a class-based party, they have no roots with the trade union movement, and they're not avowedly socialist. The LRC is an avowedly socialist organisation, campaigning and fighting with an organisation that was set up to bring about socialist change, and that's how we've got to get it back onto the path in which are the original objectives of the Labour Party itself. What are our priorities? That agenda that we set out before. I think we've got a very clear agenda about redistribution of wealth and power in this country. It's what Tony Benn said. When we did the tributes to Tony Benn, have a look at what some of us said in Parliament. If you look back on, the 1980 manifesto, it wasn't the manifesto that influenced the most in 1983. It was in 1982 the Labour programme that was developed, and at the heart it was prophetic, really. You just look at it, and it was based upon many of the policies that Tony Benn developed as a result of the campaigning that was done on the left, and it was absolutely prophetic. And at the core was what we're all about, which is an irreversible shift of wealth and power from the wealthy, the rich and the capitalist class in favour of working people. That's what we're about at our roots, and that's what the LRC is all about, and that's what we're trying to win the Labour Party back to. And I just said in Parliament then, just think if we'd have listened to him then, what our society would have been like now. But actually, more importantly, just think what we can do listening to him now, the sort of society we can create. Solidarity.